The way to describe this, it's always good to find frameworks. This is what I learned teaching MBAs. I hear you learn it getting an MBA, but I don't have one. I only teach it. Having the right framework helps you understand what the problem really is. In terms of startups, let's go back to startups because I'm trying to teach you angel investing here. There's a purpose to this. In terms of angel investing, when someone is pitching you, when an entrepreneur is speaking and pitching, they're going to show their financial model at some point in that pitch. And the expectation is they're going to show you what's called a hockey stick. Sometimes it's called a J curve, but in the lingo of California VCs and in most angel groups, it's a hockey stick. And what this is trying to show is the revenue growth of a company. So when it first gets started at zero, you find a few customers, it grows really slowly, and then it hits some magic point. We call this the knee of the curve, right? There's been an exponential pandemic. People should understand exponential growth here. That's what this is, this curve. But there's a magic moment when things start to pick up, and the speed that they pick up, the speed of change is faster and faster. And then at some point, it just feels like you're going straight up. It feels like you can't keep up. And literally, we will call that riding the rocket ship, right? I've invested in a rocket ship, or that company has turned into a rocket ship. And sales are going just through the roof. And then they fly and fly and fly up. That's how we talk about it in terms of startup finance. But what's ignored in startup finance is the fact that that rocket ship eventually tops off. The growth eventually stops. All growth, all fast-growing entities and fast-growing adoption curves, this is what this curve looks like. I'll show you that in a second. All adoption curves, they all slow down eventually. They all turn into sigmoid curves is the mathematical term, and we just call them S curves. So fast, fast, fast growth, and then something new happens, which is you saturate the market, you run out of customers, or you might just run out of those early customers, and the later customers just don't want to join in. But at some point, growth slows down dramatically, and then tops off and eventually stops. So here's what it looks like in real life. These are actual adoption curves of of technologies in US households. And we're going all the way back here to radio. This is percentage of US households that have adopted these various technologies. So let's just look at the telephone. It's a nice, good example here. So in 1900, as far back as this goes, right? Telephone was invented in 1885, I think. In 1900, like 5% of US homes had a telephone. And in 1915, it looks like a pretty good adoption curve, like 30% had a telephone. And by 1930, 40% had a telephone. And so you might have predicted that it was going to be a exponential curve, and we'd get to 100 by 1945, but that's not what happened. In this case, it never really took off that way, and it took until 50%. It took till 1945 until half of American homes had a telephone. And you can actually see it, and this ends in 2005. And of course, homes don't have telephones anymore. So it never really got to 100. Before telephones got adopted in every home in the US, cell phones showed up and took off. Cell phones are over here. Cell phones started in the late 80s, and half of the homes had a cell phone by about 2000. So it only took like 15 years for the cell phones to get adopted. And then this curve gets knocked off in 2005. It gets cut off. By now, percentage of US households with cell phones is probably like 98%, 97%, something really, really high. It's an S curve. We can see the S curve better on electricity. So again, that started about 1902, 1903 on here. And it jumped up to 50% by 1920. So like within 20 years, half of all the homes had electricity. But then you can just see the top of the curve over here, and then it just completely tops off at 100%, right? Electricity is a really nice thing to have. And you can see that different technologies get adopted in different curves. Some really fast, some really slow, all of them eventually topping off. None of them can grow past 100%. So none of those curves can go skyrocketing forever. They all have to slow down. So let's go do some experiments. Let's go back to the chat window here, and I'm going to ask you for a few different technologies. Where are we on the curve? So I've marked off 5 spots just to make this simple. So A is at the beginning. We're somewhere in the beginning. We call that the nascent part of the technology. It's not really popular yet. Hasn't taken off. Maybe no customers, maybe a few customers, but it's small. B is there to represent that knee of the curve. It's being adopted, and it's being adopted faster and faster each month or year or decade. C is we're in that rocket ship phase. It's everybody's joining in. We're like at 50% adoption, and in a month there'll be 60, or in a year there'll be 60 or 70. It's growing really, really fast. D is things are starting to slow down. We're saturating the market. If everybody who wants one pretty much has one by now. And E is at that final stage of those laggards are just joining in right now, or there are no laggards left. So let's do electricity, but not electricity in the US, because we already saw that one. Electricity globally. Where are we at deploying electricity to every home in the world? All right, we're coming in and we're saying C's and D, B, D, D, C. It seems about right to me. Some more B's. So yeah, we're somewhere in the middle, right? We got some people saying B, some people are saying C. I think it's about halfway. We're probably somewhere between B and C in reality, because a lot of we still have half the population is basically poor, and it's coming along. In terms of startup opportunity, and in terms of investing in startup opportunity, there are huge opportunities to invest in electricity out in the global south. And it's taking the form at the moment of solar panels for homes. And so there's a ton of companies in Africa, Southeast Asia, and still some in Latin America, where they're selling a small solar panel, not the size that we put on our houses here, but a small solar panel and a battery and some lights. And they sell for like $150, $200. And they're selling like gangbusters. Okay, how about mobile phones? Where are we in the world on mobile phones? Again, the whole world. Okay, mostly D's. I saw a C. I saw a B here. The person who typed in B, can you give me a little more explanation on why you think it's so early? And more C's and D's. So the way I'm going to interpret this is I think we're at E on mobile phones, right? As a general purpose, this is where you start to get distinction. When we say mobile phones in general, as in an adult human being has access to a mobile phone of any sort, any style, the answer is almost every human on the planet, almost every adult human on the planet owns a mobile phone. It's a staggeringly high number. There's like 5 or 6 billion mobile phones out there. It's only 7.5 billion people total, and almost half the population of the world is not an adult, right? More than a third. If we wanted to say mobile phones, but we really mean smartphones, well then, yeah, we still got a long way to go. In the US and Europe, smartphones are at E. Everyone who can afford a smartphone has one. In the developing world, emerging markets, we're in like BC for smartphones. The person who said B is making the nice point that there are a lot of people who have phones but don't have any way to charge them. We're actually going to, no, that's a different talk. I talked about that last week. There was a company that I talked about in Tanzania that was trying to solve that problem. And the way that problem is being solved in reality that I'm seeing is with solar panels that have a battery and lights. They also have a USB plug. So people are solving the problem by lighting their homes with solar, and as a byproduct, they can charge their phones. Okay, one more time. The question now is, where are we on the curve for e-commerce? And if you want, or I didn't narrow this one down, but e-commerce in general, buying things over an internet or a phone. Most people actually use the phone for their internet connection. And I'm seeing B's and C's in between B and C, and one D. So it's definitely not D. This exercise is here to try and open your mind to try and figure out where we are. Because like that opening chart series I showed you, like most of us didn't sell our home in 2005. We should have. Just be clear, we would have made money if we had sold our home in 2005 and gone and rented for a year or two, and then the market crashed and then we could have bought back cheaper. But we didn't. It's a pain to move. I get that. But most of us didn't even think about it. In terms of e-commerce, it's still, even with the pandemic, I think it's like between 15 and 20% of retailing is done online in the US. And when you leave the US, it just plummets. For the world, e-commerce is like in an A. Seriously, it's still really, really new. In the US and Europe, it might be a B. It's not C yet. It's really not taken off that much. The people who tend to come to this kind of call thinking about being an angel investor, we're a little further along the curve. Like we have more access to things that that others don't do. We're a long way before we get to D and E, right? So like Sears is an E, or an F as in dropping down, but I didn't make the curve that far. Okay, let's try one more. And this is all global. So globally, where are we with mobile money? Mobile money being the accessing money, paying for things using your phone. Okay, we got all of them out. I got every letter now. D, C, B, A. I got C globally, B in the US, to be specific. Another B. This one really depends on where you are. So yeah, I do have my credit card on my phone, on my iPhone, and I have never used it. I've never used Apple Pay. I have made purchases in e-commerce on my phone, and then I've typed in the credit card number. I may even have used a PayPal app once in a while. But personally, like, I'm not using mobile money yet. I'm still using the number on the plastic card. It's not really mobile money. Whereas I do a lot of business in Africa, and in Kenya. Kenya is the leader in mobile money in the world. 50 to 60% of their GDP passed through M-Pesa last year. Let that sink in. Half of everything purchased in Kenya was purchased through mobile money last year. So that's not C or D, that's E, right? That it's not going to get to 100%. So maybe, maybe it's sitting here on the curve. It's starting to slow down, but that's when mobile money is done. That's when, as an investor, if you were in Kenya and somebody brought you a new way to do mobile money, you would push back and you would say, absolutely not, it's done. That's a solved problem. We don't need another solution for mobile money. Everybody uses M-Pesa. Here in the States, when someone comes up with a new way to bring payment onto a mobile phone, investors are still somewhat excited because it's not a solved problem. Here in the US, we're somewhere between A and a B. It varies from country to country. If we were talking about credit cards, if I change the topic to credit cards, which I'm not going to do, then in the US, we're like a D or an E, right? We're somewhere in that same range. Everybody wants a credit card, pretty much can get one. They're accepted pretty much everywhere. New York City was like the holdout until the pandemic. And that's just the way we purchase. And some huge amount of, not nowhere near 50%, but 15, 20, 25% of US GDP was probably done on credit cards last year, or credit and debit cards. Let's go look at some futuristic things. Let's go back to the science, the science meets science fiction. Where are we with nanotubes? You remember in the 90s, there were this invention or this discovery of carbon nanotubes, and they were going to change everything, right? They're super strong. They're stronger than Kevlar. Like, where are we with nanotubes? Oh, I like that one. Someone said no clue. Someone said E. Everyone else is saying A. Yeah, so good. So this wasn't as obvious as, yeah, so we can make them. Yeah, we know how to make nanotubes. Somebody makes a really good point on the chat window that the darkest black paint is nanotubes. It's actually not even paint. It has to be grown on the surface as nanotubes. We know how to make them. We really don't have any products that have nanotubes in them. Very, very few. There are a few out there, but very, very few products are actually using nanotubes. We can't make a nanotube that's the length of this stick here. We can't make a nanotube that's like a centimeter long yet. We don't have solutions for that. This is one of those great examples of the technology came along. It got hyped really big. It was going to change the world and make all sorts of differences in the world. And it didn't happen. We're somewhere between A and B, but we're much, much closer to A than B. We're not at, B would be the knee of the curve, right? Knee of the curve would be, oh, my friend just bought something with nanotubes in it and I want to have it too. That's what B means. Whereas A is, it's nice. It's out there. There's some labs, there's some niche products, but nobody's buying. Something similar to nanotubes, the flat version of nanotubes is graphene. It too has been in the news, but more recently. So I think graphene was like the story from 2 years ago. Where are we with graphene? All the results in the chat window, and one more no idea. But everybody else who's typing in is saying A, which I believe is the right answer. We now know how to make a piece of graphene that's like the size of your thumbnail. We can't make a sheet of graphene. And we know what it's good for. We just don't know how to make it in bulk to actually use it in any significant way. What's interesting is what you're supposed to be taking away from this exercise is not just the idea that you can do this for any idea, but just how hard it is to figure out where we are on the curve. we're not having a unanimous decision on anything so far. We're all, for everyone except graphene, we're debating where on the curve we actually are. And again, it goes back to that curve at the beginning about the housing crisis, right? We didn't know where we were in 2006. We didn't know where we were in 2008 or 9 or 10 or 11 or 12. We don't know where we are now. The housing, we could have a housing crunch, as soon as the pandemic ends. It could crash again, just like it did before. Okay, one last one in terms of high-tech stuff. Let's talk about fusion power. So specifically electricity made, using fusion to make electricity. Where are we? Fusion was a big thing back in the 50s and the 60s, and it was news again in the 70s and the 80s. And the joke that runs in the fusion community is we'll have it in 30 years. And the date changes every we'll always have it in 30 years. It will always be available in 30 years. And what's interesting in the chat window here is people are saying zero, pre-A, doesn't exist. In fact, it's as far along as graphene. Like there are literally like a dozen startups that claim to be working on fusion. There's the big government projects, but there are startups that have fusion reactors in their labs. And those fusion reactors are getting closer and closer and closer to having a product that would make power with fusion. But none of them can do it at an affordable price, and none of them can do it at a break-even system yet. And they're all claiming it's 10 years out instead of 30. And their numbers are getting a little bit smaller. I think sometime in my lifetime, we will see a fusion reactor for sale. But the hard part is I don't know when. It could be tomorrow. It could literally open up the New York Times tomorrow and they say General Fusion has solved the problem and you can buy it. And it's really, the first one will be really expensive. Then there really is a company called General Fusion. And it could be next year. And it could be 5 years from now. It could be 10 years from now. All the fusion companies could go out of business between now and then. We don't know. We're somewhere here on the curve and we don't know how far away B is from A. Right? You never know how far B is. If you are an A, you don't know if there'll ever be a B. In terms of startups and funding, you don't know if your runway, we talked about that a few weeks ago, you don't know if the amount of money you have will get you to B. If it does, that's good. And then the problem then is you need more money to do C, because C is a fast growth thing. So someday we may see this, but when? Don't know. Same thing with flying cars. I think we will have things that look like cars that fly. We will have them soon. Soon might mean 6 months, soon might mean 9 months, soon might be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But we will have self-driving, in fact, single person, 2-person vehicles that fly us around a city. They're coming. I've seen them. I've seen prototypes. Okay, let's do a few more. I think there's just a few more in here. But let's work on the SDGs now. Where are we at solving poverty? A through E. Global poverty. This is the UN SDGs. All right, again, we have no consensus. I got A, B, E, B, 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 B to C, A. So this is one where you got to ask more questions, and all of them you should be asking more questions, but thank you for not pushing back and making this really long. The UN defines poverty at $1.90 a day. The UN and the Global and the World Bank, they set the poverty line. Their claim is that you're poor if you earn less than $1.90 a day. And on that basis, they're claiming that I think it's 85 to 90% of the world is above the poverty line, and that it's gotten way better over the last 50, 60 years. That's nice. I've seen those stats. I've seen lots of famous people touting those stats, but I would never in a million years ask anybody to live on $1.90 a day. Right? That is just a horrible thing to do. I wouldn't want people to live on $3 a day. Personally, to me, the poverty line should be somewhere between $3 and $5 a day. And if it were $5 a day, half the world would be poor. It is that bad out there. I've done a talk and I've seen the stats because I did a talk because I saw the stats. And there are more people living on less than $5 a day now than lived on the whole planet in 1960. Right? It's like 3.5 billion people are poor now, and there were only 3.2 billion people. The talk was using the Seattle World's Fair, 1962 World's Fair. So on that measure, we're somewhere around B. It's getting better. Maybe between B and C. You want to call it halfway mark C. We're getting better, but we're not there yet. We got a long way to go. When we find a company, in terms of investing again, when we find a company and it has something to do with alleviating poverty, I personally get excited as an investor. I still ask all the other questions about whether it'll work or not, because if it doesn't work as a company, you can't actually solve poverty. But if it can work as a company and be profitable and grow, and it solves poverty at the same time, I get really excited. Same thing with hunger. So world hunger, we're gonna define this one before you do the letters. People can eat 2 or 3 meals a day, whatever number they like in their culture, right? So if it's a 2 meal a day culture, they can eat twice a day. If it's a 3 meal culture, they can eat 3 meals a day. If you're American, you can eat 6 times a day. Where are we at solving world hunger? And while you're typing, Hannah asked how many investors are caring about the SDGs. The answer is we don't know, but it's more than it used to be, which is good news. And here I'm getting A's and B's. And I'll tell you, I don't know where the answer is. I have no idea where we are at solving hunger. I'm not seeing any good stats on this. My guess is because we're doing better at poverty than we were in the past, we're probably doing better with hunger at the same time. But at the same time, I'm seeing things about post-harvest losses and imports of foods and whatnot. So I think we have a long way to go on hunger.